Jane Hurtig, welcome to the Islam Unraveled Anti-Racist podcast. And you, as the Director of Resilience BC, who's graciously supported our work with Islam Unraveled and us being the faith-based community convener with Resilience BC. So we commend you for your work. And how we normally start our conversations, we'd like to know about the person and just really how you arrived to being involved in social justice and anti-racism at a level. So from a personal journey, how did you come to this work? I know it's many kind of twists and turns, but it would be grateful for us to understand how you got to here.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be on the Islam Unraveled podcast. It's a great honor and a really great opportunity to be able to talk about the Resilience BC Anti-Racism Network and the role of the conveners, which Islam Unravel has become the faith-based convener for Resilience BC. It's really a really fantastic opportunity for the network members to be able to join forces with these conveners, to be able to reach out deeper into communities, to help the public, help community members to address racism and hate. So thank you very much for inviting me today. So me personally, I'm a white settler woman that is from Treaty 6 territory, which is now called Alberta and Edmonton specifically, is where I was born. And I now live on the territory of the Lekwungen speaking people, the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. And it's a great honor to be living in this beautiful land as an uninvited guest. And my journey to where I am today is, I think, obviously with most people, begins with my parents, who were on my father's side. His father was a Romanian Jew, and his mother was from Odessa, and they met in Winnipeg and moved to Edmonton, where my father was born. And he grew up to be a bookseller and a great reader and a great learner, and became very proud Canadian and really a champion for citizens to be participating and engaging in their own communities and fighting and working to make their communities a better place, more just society. And my mother, her parents were from Ontario, and she and my dad opened up a bookstore in Edmonton in the 60s, and it was the first bookstore in Edmonton. And they both are great readers, as I mentioned, and love of learning, pass that on to my sisters and I. I have 3 sisters. And again, instilled this responsibility that we have with the privilege that we had living in a middle-class neighborhood, and having all the opportunities of the world in front of us, that was really up to us to be using that privilege to be making change. So that had a great influence on me. And I've had a really interesting career working in the community, helping people to be engaged in politics and making decisions about how they're being represented, working with volunteers at a medical facility. Lots of really fantastic opportunities to be listening and learning and helping people to engage in what their passion is for them, for these particular people to be working in their communities.
And were there any books that influenced you, or philosophies maybe from your father and your family being readers and just really understanding the greater world through the adventure of different worlds and books can take us down? Were there books that spoke to you that influenced kind of even some of your ideas that you use today?
I think we were, when we were little, we were in the bookstore a lot. So just to, I think having access to all the different types of books that there are, and being able to appreciate the value that of what you're getting from that learning. But I think that probably the work of my dad in the 80s, through a very generous grant from the Alberta government, was able to publish the Canadian Encyclopedia. And that was, long before we had the internet. And my dad was, conscious of the fact that encyclopedias that we had in our homes and in our libraries were printed in the United States. And so maybe they had snippets of information, maybe accurate, about Canada. But so this feat of putting together the Canadian Encyclopedia was a really great accomplishment. So it was the idea of being able to have a vision. It was the same thing with opening up the first bookstore, having a vision of what's needed, understanding what the public are looking for and what's needed to be helping to have an informed citizenry, and putting those ideas into practice, and actually being able to create the encyclopedia, which then through the Alberta government was a gift to, I think, every library in Canada, I believe, was as part of their centennial anniversary.
And this was the pre-Google. This was
Yes, definitely pre-Google.
We may have even had a copy. We actually grew up across the border in Fort St. John, which is not far from Edmonton.
Right.
Very, very cold in the winter.
Very, very cold. That's right. Yeah.
And even just the historical aspect of your family coming from Europe, and was it in the context of because of World War II and fascism and communism and pogroms and persecution? Was that part of the impetus for the family to come to Canada?
So this was, I should be able to tell you the date, but it's definitely maybe even pre-World War I. I don't have those exact dates, sorry. But I think the understanding of the experience of anti-Semitism, the impact of that on our community, I think that was clear. It was an interesting family that I grew up in. It wasn't, we weren't, we were more culturally Jewish. We shared holidays with my mother's family, who was not Jewish, and we would experience Jewish holidays with my dad's family. And so we got to see an eye on both sides of the coin, but definitely growing up to understand the impact of anti-Semitism was, even as we were growing up, there was anti-Semitism in Alberta. My uncle was the first Jewish person to attend U of A medical school, and the golf course that my dad was a member, and my dad was a member, had earlier had a no Jewish people allowed rule. And so it's a very, it's something that's, was still very fresh and not that hidden.
Yeah, and I think, one of the learnings is one thing they can't take away from us is our education and our knowledge,
Right.
and part of those learnings, like because experiencing that, and I think when somebody experiences discrimination and grows up with that and sees the impact of discrimination, for myself, I'm speaking for myself, when I've seen it in my life, being from originally from Pakistan, and my great grandfather came in India before Pakistan existed, and so being a person of color and a different religion, the historical racism the families endured, and to a degree, there's the intersection of race and religion, where there's multiple levels of discrimination. So to feel it and understand it, and then have compassion for others that experience that. And so I think probably why both of us are here today is because through our life learnings, we're like, well, what can we do meaningfully for other people, not just ourselves and our communities, but for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so in your journey, political and civic engagement strategies. So this is kind of your wheelhouse. So political and civic engagement strategies, how did these ideologies and these kind of understandings come in your work to reflect the work that you did in Canada, but also you have many years of international development work in the Middle East, North and West Africa, and the Caribbean. So I think what you did very wisely and consciously or unconsciously going to other countries and other continents to get a perspective on other countries and their systems and their cultures and their religions, to inform where we are in our Canadian context. So maybe let's talk about unpacking all of that.
So as I mentioned, it was, I think because of my white privilege, I had a lot of opportunity in front of me when I finished university, and was able to have opportunities to be working in politics, doing campaign organizing, working in Parliament Hill, learning about how government works. I worked in the legislative buildings in British Columbia, understanding how decisions are made, and how the public is engaged in that decision-making process, communicating with voters and, to make sure that people are understanding what's happening. And then also that piece of helping people be politically involved and be politically engaged, which was for me the most fulfilling part of that work in politics, was being able to see volunteers coming out and supporting the people that they believed would be the best representatives for them, and being able to make sure people had the training and the skills they needed in order to be doing their tasks and well, so that they wanted to continue to come back and do that work, and understanding the impact that they were having in their communities by helping to get other people engaged in that important process of deciding who's representing us in our government, or in our legislative bodies. Then I went on and was doing, specifically working with volunteers in at the BC Cancer Agency for 5 years, which was a really rewarding job. And I found that, again, it's being able to give people the opportunity to do that kind of work, to be giving back to their communities. And that's a feeling that is, it makes you feel closer and care more about what's happening in your community. And it helps you to see what changes need to happen, and helps you to be more engaged. And it also makes people feel good about themselves when they can give their time, and have the tools to be doing it well, and to feel confident, and to be committed to that, because they know that they're doing a good job. So it was a really, really amazing work, working with volunteers. I was really, really honored to be able to do that.
And in civic and political engagement. And I think realizing that if we are meaningfully wanting to help our communities, the decision makers, the policy makers, the lawmakers, and within municipal, provincial, and federal government, that's the place to have the voices heard, and have all voices and diverse voices heard, so that meaningful laws and meaningful legislation can be implemented reflecting the needs of the community. But those in government don't know unless communities are engaged with them, all throughout the process.
All throughout the process. And the most important thing is when that voter goes to the polling station to select who they want to represent them, to make sure that that voter is informed and is making an informed decision. And today, with the social media and the fake news, and there's so many different ways that that really making a good decision can be blocked. It makes it even more important for people to be getting involved, and for the voters to have an opportunity to be hearing about what is it that their options are. What is the vision that the different candidates have? What are their solutions that they're putting forward? So really, informed, educated voters is critical.
And before we get into Resiliency BC and the story of that, the origin story, and where we are today, I really did want to understand your work in the Middle East and in Haiti and in Africa, just to understand what compelled you or what brought you to these countries, and what were the lessons learned. So I know let's start with the Middle East, and then we can go to the other countries.
A million lessons learned. I went into the work really not having any clear idea of what it is I was getting into. What took me down that path was the fact that I had these political experiences and knowledge of how government works, and the organization I was working for does democracy works in countries that have transitioning democracies. And so that my experience with political parties and legislatures and volunteers and civil society was the sort of package of skills that they were looking for. So again, very, very great opportunity, and was really honored to be able to do this work. So, but as I said, not really super prepared. The first country that I went to was Mauritania, which is on the west coast of Africa, below Morocco. And it is one of the poorest countries in the world, where the Sahara Desert meets the Atlantic Ocean. And it was an incredible learning experience for me. And I think it's where I really learned to be able to really listen to people, and to hold back my white privilege going in to a country with some sort of expectation that I have something to offer, was really wrong. And so I needed to be able to sit back and listen, and be able to learn about the society and learn about the culture, and be able to understand what are the challenges that they're facing, and what do they see as the solutions. And then all I would have to offer is, well, this is what we did, and maybe there's a way to adapt that as a strategy for what you want to do, for what you want to accomplish.
So, as we know, and I think there's it's a generalization, or this kind of thought process that one country or one race or one religion, they're all the same. And by going to Mauritania, which is very diverse, I do know Muslims are a very large percentage of that population.
Mm-hmm.
Yet there's tribal issues, cultural issues, regional issues, socioeconomic issues. So there's a multi-level kind of layers of each of these countries that we're dealing with that are very complex. And by going in, as you said, listening to tell, because it's hard to teach without understanding and listening, and obviously there's lessons that can be learned from the work that you bring to the table, but it's also a two-way street. There's lessons, like you said, a million lessons that you were getting to inform even the work that you're doing in Canada, based on understandings and listenings of these diverse communities. And so Mauritania being culturally and also Islamically a significant kind of change from Canada, how is that adjustment with cultural and religious norms there that are not common here in Canada?
Well, it was incredible. I was just so honored to be working. That was the team that there was an office there where I worked with a team of amazing young people who had such patience with me, and first of all my poor French, because I was working en français, and also just with the fact that I didn't know the culture, and I didn't know the society and the tradition. So they taught me what I needed to know with great patience. And I am forever grateful, and to the fact that they helped me to be able to do what I was going to be doing with them. So there was so many things, and so many other people that came and talked to me and met with me, and on a regular basis, to help me understand what was happening around us. There was a coup while I was there, And so there was a lot happening. The political situation there was shifting quickly. After 2007, they elected their first president since um, the end of the colonial reign, and that was a really challenging opportunity for making some change happen. And specifically, I was there to support human rights organizations who were wanting to put in place a truth and reconciliation process to deal with human rights abuses that had taken place in the 80s and 90s. So that was
by friends.
no, actually it was so that's after the French left in the 60s. This was with there was a
Internally.
Taya, I think was his name. Yeah, the president who was there for I think 30 years, was ruling, and there was a population. The population is divided into three: white Moors and black Moors and Afro-Mauritanians. So they expelled the Afro-Mauritanian population and
Wow.
kicked them out of their jobs as judges or teachers or lawyers, and imprisoned and tortured. And there was a whole series of human rights abuses that took place in the 80s and 90s. So this was something that was to be a promise by the president who was elected would be addressed. There'd be some sort of human rights reconciliation for those events. And the Human Rights Commission there was taking this on. And so I was with none of my expertise in that area at all, came to just to be able to help facilitate a decision on what type of truth and reconciliation process they wanted. So we had brought people in from all over the world to show different models of how this could work, and help them come to a conclusion on what they wanted. And then just after they made their decision, there was a coup, and the president was gone, and there was another military leader and put himself in place. And I believe he's still there today.
And trying to restart it, and yeah, no, it is terribly frustrating, I'm sure, and just that complex nuance of three unique identifiable groups that identify by culture, color, skin, and religion, and really seeing how the interplay and how one side can demonize another to a degree to try and expel them. So one thing we've learned from history is we haven't learned anything from history. And I don't know who quoted this, but history tends to rhyme in terms of this type of, oh, this one group is bad, that one group is bad, and everyone's pointing fingers at each other, and then not just pointing fingers, then eventually pointing weapons at each other. So now that was like you were thrown into the deep end of a very complex kind of environment and culture and country different from Canada, and now leaving Mauritania. Where was your next destination?
So then I went to Iraq.
Iraq. Now you're going really into some heavy duty territory.
Yeah. Very different dynamic. So complex. The politics of Iraq, the tribalism there, that there's so many different people that are involved, and outside influence in the country. It is, and it continues to be a challenging place, but with all of that complexity comes an amazing environment to be in, and the people so maybe it's up at the political level where you've got all the friction and tension and instigating the violence, but the people that I was engaging with, that I was working with and meeting on a daily basis, were all really amazing people with such incredible histories, and their journey to be able to be wanting to make change in their country and engage in the democratic process was inspiring. And the women that I worked with there, I learned so much. Learned so much about Islam and about the how much strength the women got from being religious. And I learned a lot because I didn't know that much about Islam before I moved overseas. And then I found, yeah, I just found that it just is really an amazing place. I had an opportunity to see just a little bit. I lived for the most of the time on a compound. But one of the compounds we had in Baghdad was on the Tigris River, towards the end of the time that I was there. And just felt really special and magical, because although it's not in good shape right now, but it still is such a historical body of water, and the birds that were coming by, and it was just really an amazing place. All in that's surrounded, and at that time surrounded by so much violence and so much heartbreak for the staff that I worked with, and for the public, for the citizens of Iraq.
And historically, that is the cradle of civilization, Babylon, and the Tigris and the Euphrates. Like historically, for thousands of years, so much rich history, and sadly, a lot of bloodshed over the centuries and millennium. Even today. And so now there's, one thing about racism and discrimination. So there's within religions, the sectarian issues, Sunni, Shia, and then other branches of Sunni and Shia. And so although within the context where a lot of people think of Islam as, okay, they're all like that. But even within Islam, as you can see, and even Judaism and Christianity, there's so many different unique perspectives that don't agree with the other perspective, yet everyone tends to say, well, all Christians are like this, all Jewish people are like that, all Muslims are like that. But I'm sure in your experience now, you understood how uniquely different the perception of each sectarian aspect of, at least in the Islamic context, especially in Iraq, was polarizing. And dealing with that, although a lot of elements of the faith are the same, but the divide and rule kind of issue where people are pitted against each other with identifiable belief differences and willing to kill each other for that. And so propaganda plays its part on both sides. That is one thing. And then there's one side that has more money and weapons that tends to generally win. But these complex issues, by seeing it, and obviously in Canada, thankfully we live in a country where coups and violent kind of attacks against groups doesn't happen like it does in Iraq, which again, they're still dealing with the aftermath of two wars and civil war and ISIS and what have you. And so within this complexity and the perspective, what was the key learnings that you got, especially in Iraq? Because it is such it actually probably triggered the creation of ISIS, the destruction of Iraq, also the refugee crisis, starting with the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War, the refugee crisis, at least from the Middle East, a lot of that emanated from those wars. So what were the learnings based on kind of going in, let's just say, with a certain perspective, and how your perspective changed based on your experience?
Well, I think that the the finding and understanding the answers to get out of those very complex, difficult situations is, I think, something that I learned is just not an easy thing to do. And so we may sit over here in Canada and read about it or listen to it on the radio about what's going on, and well, why can't those people just get it together? That's just not, that these are really complex historical problems that need to be resolved. And from, again, the people that I came in contact with, the people that were interested in making change, working for building civil society organizations to be able to get youth engaged in their communities, or we had a really amazing program where we had debate clubs set up in some high schools around the country, and teaching the teachers how to be listening better, because that's the big skill in debate, is to be able to listen to what your opponent's saying and then to be able to respond to what they're saying with your argument. And so those people that we had an opportunity to be working with were so committed to finding a solution and understanding that only by everybody working together that they would be able to find a way out. And they had, even though these problems are so complex and historical, believing that there was a way out of it. And that's obviously, is you can't, you're not going to find a solution if you don't believe that it's possible. So admiring the people that had that strength and commitment to their country. And although I think there was still a lot of fear that the route out peace was a long ways away, which in fact it was. I was there 2009 to 2011, so that's a long time ago. That's
And
before ISIS.
a very dangerous time as well, still, even
Yeah.
at the
Yeah. So just I think that learning that the strength, I mean resiliency, I think that is a word here of people to be able to be living through those continuously living through these nightmares of violence, and then still being able to get up and say, let's fix this. This
in
isn't
overwhelming odds of,
Mhm.
of brutality and oppression in multiple forms.
Yeah.
And one thing in my travels I found in Muslim countries is the hospitality. I don't know if you got a sense of that compared to even Canada. There's just this really welcoming of guests from, especially from countries like Canada and even other countries. But I think a lot of folks that haven't traveled, they may not understand that level of hospitality. How did that hospitality that you experienced in these countries, how did that change your perspective as well in terms of your understanding of hospitality?
Well, I just the Mauritania more so, because in Iraq we were living on a compound.
Yeah.
Although I did have lots of opportunity to eat delicious Iraqi food that our colleagues would bring in from their homes, the amazing dalma, for example, that I would. I'll go back one day for to have some real dalma again. Um, and so in Mauritania and in Morocco, really, had more opportunity to be experiencing people inviting you to their homes, or often in Mauritania, we'd be traveling throughout the country, and people would invite us to meals under these beautiful tents out in the desert, and be eating these communal from these beautiful dishes of couscous and vegetables and lamb or goat, and just the most amazing meals ever. And people just so gracious. So maybe a family that maybe doesn't have a lot, still offering to invite us to come and sit with them and eat and share stories. It was just really open and warm, and so made me always feel so comfortable when I was the outsider, and was really learning. Again, it was just my time to be listening and learning, and to be able to get to feel like I was understanding where I was. Yeah, it was really amazing people everywhere I was.
And how we are in Canada is we have a mosaic of multiple cultures, but when we go to these countries that have hundreds or thousands of years of history, tradition, culture, family, tribalism, that's something that's intrinsic to the people of, as you said, a communal way of eating from the same plate, sitting on the ground, sitting with the entire family, all the generations together, which in Canada is maybe not as common as that. But again, another perspective and a completely different way of life that maybe in Canada or the West we don't necessarily have. Now, you talked about Morocco, and so was that the next journey? Was in
I went after Iraq. I went to Haiti. I was in Haiti for 2 years. That was another incredible experience. The So the history there is as you probably know, it was the first slave nation to kick out their masters and declare independence. And the rest of the colonial countries around them that had slave labor were very nervous that Haiti might be a bad example to their slaves, and they might want to rise up in the United States or in other countries in the region. So they did everything they could to keep Haiti down and to stop them from being the economic success that they would have been, because it was a very rich country, which is why the French had wanted to stay there. And geographically, it's a strategic spot in the hemisphere. And so it was a really important, I think, for other countries outside to not allow that country to thrive. And today it still suffers from that, failed launch on when they first declared independence. So literally to this day, the country is in a terrible, terrible shape. And it was for everywhere where I worked, there were lots of problems, lots of very complex problems. But for when in Haiti, it felt that path out. It felt really difficult to really understand how to get there. The country has so many layers of problems that are so difficult to address, and yet the people that I met there and the people I worked with there, my colleagues, all incredible people, incredibly generous, again, spending so much time and patience with me, and teaching me what I needed to know. And it was just the food, amazing food, and the art and the culture, unique to anywhere in the world. And it was a really amazing opportunity. Again, spending a lot of time listening and understanding and sharing strategies for things that can be adapted and used that might be helpful.
And that was a unique situation because slavery and the history of slavery and the impact of slavery in a country, whereas coming from a country where slavery was not a specific issue per se, and now coming with that whole impact on a country of colonialism, slavery, and exploitation. So that is a completely different perspective. And obviously, they kicked out the colonialists, and they're striving and fighting for their independence. And still to this day, even 100+ years later, certain issues still haven't been resolved yet, trying to self-determine. So it seems like the thread from these experiences from Mauritania, from Iraq to Haiti, is even in spite of insane odds and crazy circumstances, resilience of the people, and probably, like you said, a compassion, even a sense of humor, in spite of really difficult, tense circumstances.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Nope, I don't have anything else to say to that. You've worded it well.
And then the next stage, what was the next country you went to thereafter, after Haiti?
I skipped 3 months in Pakistan.
There we go. Pakistan. This is something that we can. I've spent time in Pakistan. Right. So let's talk about Pakistan.
Speaking of amazing food, and art and people. So 3 months there, working on a program for training women to be candidates in elections. So that was a really great experience. I was in Islamabad, and due to security, not able to travel very much. But I did make it to Karachi for a meeting with some folks. But it was a really incredible experience. Again, such amazing, smart people that were open to helping me out, helping me to understand where we were, and the differences. Every country I was in, really unique, obviously unique cultures, unique issues that they were facing, and the solutions, sometimes some of them the same, always about bringing people together. to be talking and finding consensus and making decisions amongst themselves. Forget about the international community. It needs to be done internally by the people who the decisions are going to impact.
And as you saw in Pakistan, very complex because Karachi and Sindh, different culture, different language, different tradition, different cuisine, Islamabad different, Punjab is different, Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, different racial, religious, cultural, socioeconomic, caste kind of issues, and it's not a monolith in any way. They're very layered and complex. And did you get a sense, and because a lot of people when they think of Pakistan they think a lot of negative things, but obviously people think of fundamentalism, but I find Pakistan to be a very secular country, like very, in the sense that the people are very broad-minded and very so I think there's a perception to label one country, oh, they're all like this, but it's actually, I would say, secular liberal is more the majority rather than fundamentalist, conservative, oppressive, which is what some, at least my perception, people have of Pakistan.
Mm-hmm. I think that we can say that of anywhere, though, right? Like
Okay.
we can say that of Canada. You've got some people on one extreme, and you've got other people on the other extreme, and then you've got everybody in the middle or on the edges of those. So it's unfortunate, and I think if we want to talk about Islamophobia, that it's those people on the extremes that for whatever reason, those folks that get in the media, and it's those
that hijack a narrative of the majority. So a tiny, it's like the Ku Klux Klan somehow representing all Christians, which is categorically not true. And if ISIS or these extremists that are doing their thing, it's a tiny fraction, yet for whatever reason there's either a media bias or other biases that are out there that try and conflate the majority with a tiny fraction of extremists. And
is it they're trying to get people to read? They want the sensational headlines. Nobody wants to read about the nice event that happened with some multi-faith event that happened in Islamabad one day. What they want to read about is what's happening with the violence and the Taliban or whatever is going on. It's ignorance for sure. I think the media, there's a lot of room for the media to be learning and better understanding the issues that they may be covering when it comes to international politics or it comes to religion.
And one thing I learned, and I'm sure maybe you may agree, is that I used to get a preconceived notion of a country and a people by the newspaper or something I saw on the news. And then when I'd go, I was like, it's not like that at all. It's like whatever I was being fed in newspaper articles, magazine articles, news kind of documentaries, it was completely different.
Okay, let me tell you a story. In Mauritania, there was an Israeli embassy while I was there. They got anyway, and beside the Israeli embassy, like outside of, but beside it was a bar, and there were not Mauritania was a dry country, so although there were bars at the time when I was there, they weren't legal. So one night, a car drove up and there was 3 people hopped out and they threw a hand grenade over the fence and they shot up the front door and nobody was hurt, thank goodness. But it was an attack on the bar. And so in the morning, in the media, the Israeli ambassador says we were attacked by Al Qaeda, and then or the Sahel version of Al Qaeda. And then Al Qaeda says we attacked the Israeli embassy. Like, wait a minute, you guys, nobody did either of those things. It was completely so using whatever, using the media taking it up without actually doing the research and whatever the political angles are that people are using to get their version of the truth out. Dangerous stuff.
Very dangerous. And that's the media and people using threads of the truth to make a completely different reality, which a former president of the United States did very, very well. A
That's right.
completely distorted perception of what is real, what's not real.
Yeah.
So now getting to what's real for us in our
Yeah.
context in Canada. And your family, different background from Europe, my family, different background from India, Pakistan. And then there's Canadians from Korea, from China, from Japan, from all over the world. And I will get this. So although proud Canadian, born in Canada, raised in Canada. But whenever I travel, or even within Canada, people ask me, where are you from? And I go, I'm from Canada. And they go, no, where are you from? I'm from Canada. So even from a perception, like, so although my skin color, my perception, possibly the beard, religion, name is different from what somebody would perceive a Canadian to look like.
Mhm.
So I always find it amusing. I'm learning to be more amused rather than offended that wherever I go, Muslim country, non-Muslim country, I always get this question, where are you from? And then also whenever I do say I'm from Canada, there's always a question, no, seriously, where are you from? So it's like this kind of thing to justify, I am Canadian, third generation. I love the fourth generation, and I love the country, but I do appreciate and respect my heritage and my roots. So it's both of that. Now, getting to the origin and history and how Resilience BC came to being in this time and age where racism is actually increasing. It's not decreasing. I think maybe under the Obama administration, maybe we thought it was getting better, but with social media, with other issues at stake, racism is getting worse and worse and worse, exacerbated by online disinformation and maybe foreign actors working to divide communities even further on different divisive issues. So getting to this vision for Resilience BC, and I got to commend the work that you and your team have done, because it is comprehensive, it is ambitious, it is, again, we're here and we're grateful that the phone calls that we made to government that weren't really returned years ago are now being returned, and we're part of the process. So let's talk about how we got to here with Resilience BC.
So I agree that that the government of the day sees this as a priority, and it's unprecedented, the support that they're giving. They have the first time that there's been a parliamentary secretary that's responsible for anti-racism initiatives. They're bringing in anti-racism legislation. They are going to be bringing in legislation to be collecting race-based data that will allow for understanding more deeply the impact of racism in the country, in the province. And then they funded the Resilience BC Hub, which supports a network of 36 organizations around the province that are also funded by the province to be doing anti-racism work in their communities. So, and then these conveners that have been brought on to be connecting members of their communities, whether it be Black communities, Asian, and then the faith-based organizations. It's really an important initiatives that are taking place right now, and I'm really proud of the government for the work they're doing, and honored to have an opportunity to be working on these issues with you and with the network members, and then my really great colleagues that I have. We've done over the last year, put in place a number of different programs to be supporting the network members, spend time. We have monthly meetings, and we've been doing some workshops and just helping to bring the network members together to be sharing their experiences and what lessons they've learned. We're not more in taking initiatives in their communities. So lots and lots of lessons being learned.
And with the spokes, because we've got Chinese Canadians, Korean Canadians, we've got Muslims come from every walk of life. 30% of Muslims are Black Muslims from Africa as well. So, and then we have Asian, Indonesian, Malaysian, Filipino, and in Thailand and even mainland China. There's 100 million Muslims in mainland China. So many different intersections of race and religion, and same with the Christian community, many different races and religion, and also even in the Jewish community, there's the Sephardic Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, and African Jews. So we even though the religion is the same or similar, but the race and the intersection of religion comes together frequently. So now in this context with the spokes, how did you reach out, and how did you assemble the spokes and get these teams? So your current team, the core team of Resilience BC, and then from that core team bringing the spokes together.
So we use the very ingenious tool called SurveyMonkey.
Fantastic.
Yep, and we're really not doing anything without consulting with the network members, because we work for them. So wanting to understand what are your priorities, what are your challenges, and what can we be doing to be of some kind of assistance. And as you can imagine, each community, as you know, each community is so different, and opportunities in each community to be talking about racism, to be engaging with different communities. It varies. Lower Mainland's very different from Dawson Creek, different from Cowichan Valley. So that's the really the beauty of the program, is that we're able to be tailoring the support that we're offering to what they need, and we're using these SurveyMonkeys, and we have lots of Zoom calls to be listening to what people are looking for and then responding to that.
And
I want to add that something that's a priority for the hub is to be taking a decolonized approach to our work, and ensuring that we're making sure that everybody's kind of on the same page on that. So we've had a number of different workshops and sessions to be talking about engaging with Indigenous communities, First Nations in British Columbia, to be able to make sure everybody's got a real clear understanding of the issues that are faced by Indigenous people in British Columbia, and what the challenges are, and how to be working towards ensuring that their communities are inclusive, and that the services are being provided equally to everyone, including the First Nations populations.
And you brought up a great point. And again, the First Nations community is very diverse. Languages are different, cultures are different, the cuisine is different. And so whether it's the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and we had a great conversation with the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, one of their representatives. And we were just talking about how we talk about God. And in Muslims, we say Allah. And I said, in the books that I read growing up, the Great Spirit. And so the Tsleil-Waututh, they don't say the Great Spirit. They said that a lot of the Eastern tribes say the Great Spirit. We call it, we say the Creator. And so even from a religious standpoint, so one of the members of the Lillooet Nation, Norm Leach, we were talking about how talking about the ancestors of First Nations, where they talk about the mountains and the trees being ancestors, because it's like when we die, we're buried, we decompose, we become food for the animals, compost, birds, what have you. So that even viewing the earth as family, that was a powerful distinction. And yeah, and even salmon. We talked to MLA Adam Olson, and from the Sartlip Nation, he talked about how from human beings to salmon, and how that mythology comes together, and how we are part of the fish, and the fish are part of us, and so that holistic connection. And then the other thing Norm Leach brought up was Indigenous people didn't separate race and religion. It's like we're one, like we're not First Nations, and then we have this religion. It was our religion and identity and race are the same thing. And so that was something, and Norm was talking about, we haven't worked on getting religious status because our ethnic identity and religious identity were the same, but getting charitable status for religion was something that he thought was something they could work towards, because they're talked about in a racialized sense, but maybe not in a religious sense, from having their own kind of tax status regarding charitable issues for religious organizations. So just with those conversations, we got to understand nuances just with a few discussions that we've had. And so decolonization and our First Nations that were on their land. So one thing that we understood, so my uncles, they started the first mosque in British Columbia in 1959. So 1959, it's on West 8th near Canby. And yeah, and so Yusuf, our colleague on Islam Unraveled, like one thing about having a mosque, it has to be on land that you own. And if it's stolen land, there's a dubious kind of understanding of what is the status of your mosque if it's on land that you don't own. And so, that was a key distinction. So doing our part as Muslims, that, although my family's been here for 4 generations, but the First Nations have been here for millennia. So if we're doing our part, at least in our context as Muslims, to invite our First Nations brothers and sisters to come to our mosque, and vice versa, visit their communities, break bread. And actually, this is another distinction the Tsleil-Waututh Nation brought up. They say the most intimate things, the second most intimate thing a person can do with one another is to eat with one another. And so that was another thing. So to break bread, to sit with one another as part of a cultural, spiritual, religious tradition. And so these are things, as the convener, we're attempting to do for faith-based communities. And we're looking at our First Nations faith-based community as their First Nations and their faith, and to connect on that level.
That's fantastic. That's going to be of huge value to when you start reaching out to the other communities to be sharing that information. And so it's helping to cross over those boundaries of where people don't see there's any commonality. Really interesting work. And
you brought up SurveyMonkey, and part of what Yusuf and I discussed with other members of the ministry is what we heard reports. So not just metrics of how many people we met, how many communities we met, but what did we hear? Mm-hmm. What did we hear? And what did we understand? Just like what we discussed now. So we're going to work to formalize that so we can provide it to Resilience BC. So all the communities we meet with. So if there's questions, we got some questions, but if there's any comprehensive list of questions that Resilience BC would like answered from all these multiple communities, please send it over, and we're happy to kind of get as much information back as possible. Interesting. That's great. Thank you. And now we're just near the end of the hour. So now this is cliche, but the youth is our future. And one of the recommendations we made on this call earlier today with the Parliamentary Secretary Rachana Singh was a youth committee or advisory for this upcoming anti-racism legislation, because what's different, I'm in my mid-40s, and I understand the world is in a certain way, but I wasn't born into the internet generation, video gaming, online, everything. And so that perspective, I don't necessarily have. And because after we go, these young folks are going to be taking over, that to have them be part of the consultative table, because teenagers, elementary school students, high school students, university students have a perspective we don't have. Mm-hmm. And in that concept, that in leaving our future generations with contribution, not just tokenized contribution, but being part of the process. Because if we look at even Greta Thunberg or Malala Yousafzai, young That's people right. are very powerful. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We so we have a website that I know is not something sort of an old-fashioned tool now, I think. But so after getting the website up, we'll be moving to social media.
And I think that's where we'll be able to have the greatest influence with getting the message out. The objective here is to be normalizing discussion about racism, that this is something that we need to talk about. What's happened with COVID, the anti-Asian racism that was uncovered, all of this racism has been there all along, but really what has happened is that the light has been shone on it. And we're now, and I'll have an opportunity here to be talking about what's under that dirty rock, if you want to say, that's been hiding under there all this time, and normalizing the discussion. So for white people who thought that this was a very happy country and everybody was getting along, to people, other communities where they maybe have been victims of racism but haven't wanted to talk about it before shame or feeling uncomfortable talking about it. So for whoever you are, to be able to understand that it's an important part of our society that we need to talk about. It's a problem that we have, and you can't solve it if we don't talk about it. So the social media will be really about trying to, help work with all the other amazing people that are working on anti-racism initiatives right now, to be helping to normalize that discussion, drive people to where they can get more information, where they can learn more about the impact of racism. Lots of tools on our website about things you can be reading, watching, listening to be able to learn how to become an ally, to be able to be fighting against racism in your own community, and then connecting with the Resilience BC member where you're living. So the website is resiliencebc.ca, and it's got a lot of great tools. But again, you're talking about youth, and so we're going to be using social media to be reaching out.
Great. And the last thing we're planning after the lockdown is our anti-racism roadshow, where physically Yusuf and myself, we do like road trips, but to physically go to the spokes and do programs, and even an idea we have called the anti-racism happy hour, where we buy coffee and tea for folks at a local cafe and just have members of the Black community, Jewish community, of those different localities, and just kind of meaningfully communicate with people that have never met Muslims or Jewish people or Black people or First Nations people, and just do it in a very simple, straightforward, old-fashioned, thousands-of-year-old traditions of sitting down and having tea and breaking bread with somebody.
Really nice. Sounds great. Post-COVID, I'm all for it.
Thank you so much, Jane Hurtig, Director, Resilience BC. Thank you again for your great work, and looking forward to keeping our work together and improving upon what we're doing today.
Thank you for the invitation. Great opportunity to talk with you. Thank you.